Hey guys, welcome back to another day of Summer of the Secret Squadron. Today we are reading chapter 15 and 16. I can't wait to find out what happens today. Let's get started. Chapter 15. We packed up our stuff and climbed down the big rock and turned for the Bayou train bridge. Logan and Sumner had followed the tracks down to the bridge once with their dads, but I had never made it that far. It was pretty close to a mile down in the valley below Lyon College. The railroad tracks followed the Bayou Creek for the most part, but the creek would stray off now and then. I guess just to say that it had a mind of its own. It was blazing hot by the time we hit the tracks, and it was very tempting to take a break and wade out into the creek when it came sidling up beside us. Parts of the stream were quite deep, even over our heads, but the best place to cool off was about half a mile up. The Rocks, as everyone called the swimming hole, was a bend in the stream where a deep pool had formed just below a small rocky bluff. It was awesome. The bluff made a great high dive, and besides that, there was a rope swing off of this big tree that hung out over the water. The only bad thing about it was a lot of people knew about the swimming hole, and sometimes it was crowded. We usually made it up there once a week or so, and although we were anxious to make it to the bridge, the thought of taking a quick dive at the rocks was sounding better with every step. Finally, we came to the cutoff where we turned to go to the rocks. Our shirts were off and tied around our waists, and everyone had already taken at least 2 turns carrying the pack. No one needed any convincing. We practically leaped over the 2 fences we had to cross to get to the sandy beach. Being a weekday, there weren't but about 15 people laying out or jumping off the bluffs. But we were too hot to worry about them, so we hid our stuff in some bushes and plunged into the cool water. One of our favorite games at the rocks was to dive down to the bottom and see who could find the most interesting object, or better yet, the most money. We had found all kinds of things at the bottom of the pool. Besides beer bottles, we had found almost $4 in change, a $5 bill, a couple of bracelets, a necklace, a horseshoe, and lots of shoes. Usually we had our masks, but without them, the best we could come up with was an old can with a pull-off tab. We were about to quit the game and head up to the bluff for a quick jump when Trevor and Jacob showed up. "Hey guys, where y'all been the last couple of days?" Jacob shouted from the edge of the sandy beach, although we weren't that far away. "We've been around," Sumner said coolly. "Where have y'all been?" "Well, we were playing catch over at the middle school yesterday," Jacob answered. "We were hoping y'all would show up for a game." We waded out of the water to where our friends were standing. "We were too busy," Logan spoke up. "Busy? What were you doing?" Trevor asked. "I had to clean my room yesterday," I said, glaring at Logan, who had a smirk on his face. "Sumner and Logan helped me, and then we had to go down to the store." In an attempt to change the subject, Sumner blurted, "Last one of the bluff's a rotten egg," as he took off toward the small cliff, followed in close pursuit by the rest of us. We raced up the steep embankment to the jumping off point. Trevor was the only brave soul that would dive in off the bluff head first. The rest of us did cannonballs. One by one, we made it to the top and made our jump as soon as we saw a clear spot below. Being the last one up the hill, I guess I was the rotten egg. Running was not my strong suit. I saw a spot open to the left and made my jump. But just as my feet left the edge of the bluff, my eyes caught a glimpse of Tommy Dutton, one of the 7th graders, swimming in my open spot. Splash! I hit the water just in front of him. As I plunged below the surface, I knew what would be coming next. Tommy would be coming after me. I swam under the water as far away from him as I could, but it was no use. He was on top of me before I even came up for air. "Hey, twerp, why don't you watch what you're doing?" Tommy said. Although he was only in 7th grade, Tommy had always been a big kid. And although my brain knew this, apparently my tongue did not. "Why don't you learn not to swim under the bluff?" I returned. "Why, I'm going to teach you a lesson," Tommy said, grabbing me as I tried to move away from him. He took hold of the back of my neck and flipped me head first down below the surface to where my feet were the only things sticking out of the water, holding me there upside down. As much as I struggled and punched his legs with my fists, He was not letting go, and I was starting to panic. I could tell Sumner and the guys were trying to make him let go of me, but it wasn't working. In desperation, I started swinging higher. I knew I could put him out of commission with just one well-placed punch, but even that was apparently impossible. Holding me at arm's length, Tommy could completely protect himself. Finally, when I thought at any second I would have to breathe in a breath of water, he let me go. I somersaulted to the surface and gasped for air. My lungs seemed stiff and hard as a rock, and I didn't think I would ever get him to take in air fast enough. For several seconds I was dizzy. I wasn't taking anything in around me except air. But finally I began to return to earth and realized that the whole gang was standing around me, shaking me and asking me if I was okay. I'm okay. I'm gonna be okay, I said, still breathing heavily. I thought you were a goner, Trevor remarked. Me too, I said, starting to calm down a little bit. I think he would have drowned you if it hadn't been for his sister up there telling him to let you go, Sumner pointed. I turned to look where Tommy had his back turned to us, talking to 3 older girls. The middle one must have been his sister because she was still giving him the what for. Suddenly, for no reason except that my brain knew my feet were carrying the rest of me out of the water, I was going toward Tommy. Apparently, somewhere, unknown to my cognitive self, my subconscious had some kind of revenge plan. The guys, even Logan, became silent, and I quietly made my way up behind Tommy, who was still arguing with his sister. All 3 girls were aware of my presence, but seemed to be in on the revenge plan as well, and did not even flinch to suggest that I was standing behind him. Suddenly, as I stood there, my subconscious plan turned back over to me, and for a moment, I was without a clue as what to do. Quickly ruling out any kind of a physical duel, I did the next thing that popped into my head. I lifted my foot and gave him a hard push, sending him flying into the water. "Let's go!" I yelled, but there was no need. The guys were already making their way to the other side of the pool as I dove in to catch up with them. I glanced back to see if Tommy was on our trail, and that one glance was priceless. The girls were rolling in the sand with laughter. We all scrambled out of the water onto the other side of the creek. Jacob and Trevor grabbed their stuff off the beach and headed to the cutoff. Tommy had finally managed to wade back across the creek when he motioned to his friends to come help. Sumner, Logan, and I made our way to the bushes where we had hid our packs. Trevor and Jacob were already cutting across the field as we were heading our way through the first barbed wire fence. We took off running like we had never run before, and I was in the lead. It helped that Logan and Sumner were carrying the backpacks. Then it hit me. We weren't heading back home. We were supposed to be going down to the bridge. Suddenly, I veered off the beaten trail and dove into the tall, uncut fescue grass. I called for Sumner and Logan to do the same. "What are we doing?" Sumner whispered as we turned around on our bellies in time to see Tommy and his friends run up to the fence. "Just stay down. Maybe they won't waste their time coming after us," I said, motioning them to get down. Sure enough, in a couple minutes, the 3 older boys turned around and went back to the rocks. "That was a close one," Logan said. "Are you crazy?" "I guess so. That probably wasn't the best idea." "You may never live that down if he ever catches you," Sumner asked. "Guys, we better get going if we're going to make it to the bridge today," Logan said. "What do we do now?" Sumner asked. "If we can stay in this field until we make it over to the wooded area," Logan said, pointing, "I think we will be able to get back onto the tracks and up there without being noticed." "That's just what I was thinking," I said to Logan. Sumner was still a little anxious. "Well, let's go before we have a chance to get caught." We slapped our hands together while we were still lying on the ground, and in a quiet whisper we chanted, 1, 2, 3, Secret Squadron. That's the end of chapter 15. Chapter 16. We waded through the tall hay field, glancing back at the cutoff from time to time to make sure no one was following us. After a while, no one could have seen us if they wanted to. The hay was so thick and tall. We made it to the edge of the woods and crossed the other fence, and climbed up the steep gravel slope onto the tracks. There was no sign of Trevor or Jacob. We still had about half a mile to go before we would come to the bridge. We didn't exactly get refreshed at the pool like we had thought, especially me. We were all tired and already hot again. We walked single file in the middle of the tracks, hardly saying a word the rest of the way. The only sound was the occasional kick of a rock or the spring of the grasshopper. My mind wandered as we settled into the rhythm of walking on the railroad ties. I guess we all wanted time to think. I thought about the day's events. I tried not to let myself think of what Tommy Dutton would do to me the next time he saw me. Mostly I thought about the boy who had walked these tracks some 60 years before. A chill ran down my back, and I thought about him walking down to the bridge alone. I knew I would never come down this far by myself. There was something eerie to me about train tracks. I didn't know why. It was just that way. I thought about him walking. I thought about his steps. Did he step on every tie or every other tie? Was I walking in his footsteps? Was it quiet and scorching hot like today? Suddenly I felt something I couldn't explain. Even though Sumner was just ahead of me and Logan behind, I felt for a few moments deeply lonely and even scared. Even stranger, it was like I could almost see him walking with me quietly behind. I could feel what he was feeling and think what he was thinking. It was as if in a trance, and this monstrous conveyor belt of cross ties was moving beneath my feet. I floated along for a while in this state until I was abruptly awakened by Logan and Sumner shouting at me to get off the tracks. A train was coming up behind us, and I hadn't even heard the chug of the engine. I followed Logan and Sumner down the side of the hill to get out of the way of the train. The engineer blew his whistle for us. The long, slow line of cars went by. "Did you not hear the train coming?" Sumner asked. "I guess I was daydreaming," I said, shaking my head. "It must have been some dream," Logan concluded. "The bridge is just right around that bend," Sumner pointed as we climbed up onto the tracks once more. "Let's double time it," Logan ordered. "I'm ready to see what's under there." Now we were walking side by side, one on the outside of each rail and me in the middle. We took the ties two at a time. There was no daydreaming. It didn't take long before we were inside of the bridge. We slowed down a little so Sumner could pull out the notebook and read us the bridge clue. Okay, 14th day of August. Jim, the items you needed have been placed under the Bayou train bridge at the east end, under the support ties. Look for the red X. Henry, SSFC. Sumner read aloud. All right, the sun sets over there, so the east end is going to be the other side of the bridge. "We're going to have to cross to the other side," I concluded. "Uh-oh," Sumner asked. "What is it?" I asked. "Last year, when we came down here with Dad, Logan was too scared to cross," Sumner informed. "That was last year. It won't bother me now," Logan assured. "We'll see," Sumner said doubtingly. We made it to the bridge. It was an old open-air wooden bridge with no sides, which I guess trains don't need anyway. The ties supporting the rails were about 8 or 10 inches apart, which did make it a little scary, even though I was not about to admit it. We started across with Sumner in the lead, and then me, and then Logan. It wasn't that it was that hard or that far, but we were having to focus on every step, and it made me a little dizzy. Finally, we made it across the 60 or so feet to the other side and scrambled down the slope to the underside of the bridge. The ground was bare, with only a scrubby plant growing here and there, either due to the lack of sunlight or the possibility that animals frequented the bridge as a shelter. Looking overhead, all we could see were clumps of old mud and grass swallow nests, and literally hundreds of dirt dauber nests covering the sides of the sport ties. There was no sign at all of a red X. "Y'all see the X?" Logan asked. "I don't see anything, but I'm not sure the X would still be here after all these years," Sumner said. "Even if it was here, it might be covered up by all these dirt dauber nests. They're huge," I concluded as I tried to break one off with my hand. "We don't really need the red X anyway," I suggested. "We know he hid it on this end. We know it had to be able to be reached, so that rules out anything from about here down," I said, motioning toward the middle of the bridge. "It has to be in one of these spaces along the lateral supports or up in that corner. All we have to do is search behind those ties. If it's still there, we should be able to find it." "Makes sense to me," Logan said. "Me too," agreed Sumner. "Let's go." Logan and Sumner started on either side as far out as they could reach. I went back to the far corner to start there. In order to see behind the lateral support beams, we had to be able to get our heads up close to the cross ties and look down. Even then, you couldn't really see very well. If there was a bird's nest sitting on the support, you couldn't see down at all unless you ripped it from its perch. Most all of them were old nests anyway, so that's what we started doing. I started in the corner closest to Logan and began moving his way. After tearing down 10 or so nests, we had still found nothing, but kept going. I came up to my next nest, pried it off just like the others, and stuck my head up for a look. There, a few inches from my nose, was the nose of a snake with 2 eyes staring straight into mine. "Snake!" I yelled, ducking my head as fast as I could. Logan and Sumner came running. "Where is it? Where's the snake?" Logan and Sumner both asked. "It's right up there." I pointed, shaking so hard I could hardly raise my hand. Logan looked up at the beam. "I don't see anything." "If you can't see it from here, but it's up there, all right," I assured him. "You think we can scare him out?" Sumner wondered. "I don't know. You can try. If you don't mind, I'll watch from back here." Sumner and Logan began picking up rocks and throwing them back into the space where I had pointed. It wasn't too long before the brown and yellow head of the snake pointed out over the beam. "Whoa, it's a cottonmouth," Sumner confirmed. "I'm not sure it's convinced it needs to move," I said. "I'll give it a reason," Logan said confidently. Logan picked up a big rock and threw it as hard as he could. It missed the snake's head, but it was enough to convince the snake to move. The snake slid out of its hole and down to the ground. However, it didn't seem ready to bow out of the fight, and the snake came toward us. "Watch it! It's coming after you, Logan!" "He better watch me," Logan advised as he reached down to pick up another rock. We all began pelting the snake, this time until it was finally ready to give up. It dropped its head and made a dash for the stream. We all gave it one more for the road before it disappeared into the water. "I've heard that cottonmouths are aggressive, but that thing was downright vicious," Sumner stated. "It's just a miracle he didn't bite me," I said, shaking my head. "He wasn't a foot away from my nose." "You better get down on your knees and thank the Lord tonight, because if that snake had bit you on the nose, you would have been history long before we could have gone for help," Logan said in all sincerity. "Believe me, I've already thanked him," I confessed. "Well, what are we going to do now?" Logan wanted to know. "I don't know, but I don't think I can do that anymore," I admitted. "Tell you what," Sumner said. "Let's keep looking, but this time we'll use sticks to knock the nests off. Then once you know everything is clear, you can look in." "Well, I'll try my best," I said. We began searching the beams again, hoping that we hadn't found the mama snake to the whole brood of babies. I used a very long stick to knock off the bird's nest as well as to feel for anything behind the beam. After a few minutes, I was starting to relax about the whole situation when Logan let out a yelp that once again sent my heart into my throat. "Woo-hoo!" Logan cried. "Look what I found!" Sumner and I ran down to where Logan was standing. Logan was scraping off a dirt dauber nest from the support beam, and suddenly we realized what he had found. The red X. We all shouted. "We found it!" Sumner explained. "How did you find it?" I asked. "I looked up and there it was. A little bit of red was sticking out from underneath the dirt dauber nest," Logan said. "I figured it had to be the red X." I looked up and there it was. A little bit of red was sticking out from underneath the dirt dauber nest, Logan said. "I figured it had to be the red X." Well, just above the red X were 2 swallows' nests clumped together and one behind the other. We all 3 climbed up to where we could get a look behind the support beam. Sumner took his stick and jabbed at the nests in front until they came loose from the beam. Then we all took a look. The second nest seemed to be setting out in the middle of the space. It wasn't on the beam, but behind it. Forgetting about the snake, I reached and grabbed the bird's nest, but it hardly budged. With both hands, I took hold of the nest to try and pry it. Suddenly, it gave way, and up came the nest along with the tallest ball jar I had ever seen. Some swallow had built her nest directly on top of the lid. We all let out a cheer. "We did it!" I shouted. "We found it!" Sumner explained. "Bring it down. Let's take a look at what's inside," Logan commanded. We all climbed down and moved to a more level spot under the bridge. The jar was filthy. Dirt and dried-on bird poop completely concealed its contents. Using the edge of one of the beams, I sliced the nest from the top of the jar lid. It wasn't a clamp-on glass lid like before, but a big, heavy gray one like I'd seen. After a lot of twisting and passing the jar from one to another, we finally were able to unscrew the lid. Sumner untied his t-shirt from around his waist and spread it on the ground to make a place to dump the contents. As I inverted the jar, Sumner and Logan started grabbing. "Hey, look, it's another decoder badge," Logan explained. "And a ring, another ring," Sumner added, holding up the ring in each hand. Beside the decoder badge and the 2 rings, there was another code manual, 3 rolled-up comic books, and 2 rolls of pennies still in their wrappers. I held up the jar to make sure there was nothing left stuck inside. "You guys gotta look at this," Logan said, holding up the decoder badge. We scooted over next to Logan for a closer look. "It's a picture of a boy," Logan said. This decoder badge was different than the first 2. It was made out of brass and had a dial like the other 2, but above the dial on either side were waving American flags, and in the middle was a place for a small picture. There at the top was a headshot of a boy, the boy that had sent us on this adventure. There's actually a picture. I'll show it to you. "Let me see that." Sumner snatched it away from Logan's hand. "Hey, give it back," Logan demanded. "Hold on just a minute," Sumner said, holding it up close for a good look. This looks like you, Benjamin." "What?" I said in disbelief, grabbing the badge away from Sumner. "It looks like you," Sumner said, defending himself. I took a good look at the boy in the picture. Logan squeezed in to look over my shoulder. In the past, different people had told me I looked like that person or this person. I never once saw the resemblance. But this time, I did. The photograph was black and white and obviously old, but it looked like it could have been taken of me yesterday in my backyard. Big eyes, a ruddy complexion, the dimpled chin. Looking into the eyes of the boy in the picture once again sent chills up my spine, took my breath away. I didn't know what to say. "You're crazy, Sumner," I said finally, in denial. "No, he's right," Logan said. "It does look like you." "Y'all are just playing with my mind," I said, trying to convince myself of the same. "Why would we do that?" Sumner asked. "Admit it, the boy in the picture looks like you." "Well, maybe there's a resemblance," I confessed. "We didn't say it was you," Logan pointed out. "We just said it looked like you." "A lot like you," Sumner added. "Cut it out, guys," I ordered. "I don't want to talk about it anymore." Just then we heard a train coming in from out of town. It was moving fast, and it was upon us before we knew it. Not that we were in any danger or anything, but the train was loud as it began passing over the bridge and ended our conversation whether we wanted it to or not. Nothing could be heard except the roar of that train. So while both trains passed over, we looked over our other finds. Both rings looked like they were made of brass. One had a box-like top with an emblem of a crown on the lid. It opened up to reveal a tiny mirrored compartment. The other has a silvery round top that was actually a cover for a signet, a stamp. The stamp was the letter M. Beside the rings, the code manual had the year 1942 on it and a picture of the codograph like that we had found in the jar. The comic books were January and February issues for the year 1943, and the pennies were wheat pennies, like the others. Finally, the train passed, and we could hear ourselves think again. But all I was thinking was about the boy in the picture. Logan and Sumner had moved on and were fighting over who got which ring, but all I could think about was him. I began packing up our stuff and readying us for the trip back, but he was always there in the front of my mind, almost as if every time I went to pick up something I had to step around him or ask him to move out of the way. His image was vivid, even if he was in black and white and silent. Finally, I was able to push him aside, and for a moment anyway, long enough to convince Sumner and Logan that everything needed to go back in the jar for now. We could decide somewhere down the road what we were going to do with the stuff we were finding. We were all ready to head back home. We were exhausted. The food was long gone. It was only a little after 4, but it seemed much later. Staying up late and getting up early was beginning to take its toll, and I, for one, was ready for a break. The sun was still blazing hot as we moved back west along the train tracks toward home. We walked slow. Sumner and Logan ribbed me about the whole snake incident. It certainly had been funny at the time, but now that it was all over and everything was okay, we had a good laugh. Logan recounted his amazing discovery of the red X that led us to the jar. He was never one to withhold praise when praise was due, especially when it was due to him. And of course, we talked about Henry and the boy in the picture. We assumed the boy in the picture was Henry, anyway. Who else would it have been? Sumner and Logan couldn't stop talking about how freaky it was and Henry and I looked alike. There was no use arguing with them. It was freaky, and I was freaked. Maybe he's a relative, Sumner suggested. The initial on the ring is the letter M, Logan pointed out. Maybe it stands for Matthews. Or midnight, as in Captain Midnight, I said rudely. As far as I know, I do not, nor have I ever had relatives living in Batesville. My face turned red to match my tone of voice. Logan and Sumner got quiet. We walked for several minutes without saying anything. I'm sorry, guys, I finally said. I don't know why this is bothering me so much. Maybe he could be a relative. I'll talk to Dad tonight. Tomorrow, Mrs. Jackson is going to help us find out who used to live in our house back in the 40s, and maybe we'll get some answers. Sumner and Logan just looked at me, and then suddenly they pounced on me. Sumner put me in a headlock and began giving me noogies, while Logan commenced to frogging me. This was their way of saying that all was forgiven. We spent the rest of the trip dreaming about what we were going to do with our shares of the loot, assuming that all this stuff we're finding was worth some money. I really did not want a souped-up go-kart or a race down at the bayou, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to sell all the things we were finding. To begin with, it was a bunch of neat stuff. Neater still was the way we had come to find it. It was just too special to turn around and sell. Of course, a go-kart would be special, too. And that's the end of chapter 16. See you tomorrow.